evolution is just a game. And we found this really unique strategy where we have to use our brains to impress women instead of just having the best looking feathers.
We are constantly in competition with every other species on this planet. Right? And so the competition between the big and the small is the reason why sex exists. If you measure your index finger, have been able to predict promiscuity in people.
Is that good or bad?
The ratio between your index finger and your ring finger.
You're listening to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast with your hosts, Gene and Darren.
Welcome to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast. I'm Darren with our marketing genius, Gene.
Hey, guys.
Hey, we got a fun topic today. We're going to be talking about love.
Love.
Because, well, and let's ask ourselves, why are we talking about love? Why is this relevant to kind of our world of irrational influence?
Well, love is the ultimate version of irrational influence.
I guess so.
It makes us go crazy. It makes us do beautiful things sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't make any sense, right? Why we fall in love, how we fall in love.
Right.
Why is it even there? And so I adore this topic.
Yeah.
I've thought about this topic for a long time. And I was actually very worried for a long time. Well, I wanted to make sure to get it ready the right way.
Yeah.
Because thinking about love and having a model of how to think about love helps you navigate the world of relationships a lot better.
Are we going to learn about how to navigate love, how to find love? What are we going to learn in this episode?
I think we're definitely going to figure out how to navigate, find, attract love.
Nice.
But we're going to look at it from three different perspectives, right? So this is going to be part one, and we're going to look at love from three different lenses. And if you kind of incorporate these lenses in your way of looking at the world, I think you'll benefit a lot in terms of trying to maybe even understand why people act so weird sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot of these underlying hidden layers. The matrix is happening.
The matrix.
The matrix of love.
The multi-dimensional matrix of love.
And so I think that will give people something useful to, again, try to figure out and decode some of the weird things that might be happening in their life.
So practical advice for you guys who may be struggling, or maybe you're looking for love and possibly attract your future soulmate. We're going to break it down today.
Break it down.
All right, let's start, Gene.
Yeah, and so practical advice for sure is going to be towards the end of each of these lenses, because we're going to look at it from three different scientific fields.
Are we going to be talking about the first lens in this episode? Or
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
So one of the way to organize all this stuff that we're doing in a good way is there's something called Sternberg's triangular theory of love.
Ooh, triangular theory. Right. I like it already.
And Sternberg puts forward the idea that there are three ingredients to love.
Ooh.
And depending on how you mix and match these three ingredients, you get different kinds of love.
So it's kind of like one of those diagrams where, you kind of go in one direction and it kind of makes one point stronger and one less, like maybe weaker.
And so as you kind of navigate it,
got it.
You can have one of these ingredients, you can have two of these ingredients. But if you have all three of these ingredients, you potentially have true love.
Oh, so you're trying to maximize all 3 points then?
If you can,
if you can, if it's possible.
That would be ideal, yeah.
Okay,
that would be the ideal.
Let's dive into these 3 points.
Right, and so these three ideas line up very nicely with the three scientific lenses with which you can look at love.
Got it.
All right, so the three ingredients of true love. The first one is something that Sternberg calls intimacy, but I like the word connection more. Okay. This is the liking part of love. This is the feeling of closeness, the friendship part of love, where, if this was the only ingredient you had, your love might very much be kind of a platonic kind of love, right? It's the ability to share interests with people, the ability to have trust, the connection aspect. A lot of times when people, like, for example, go into couples therapy, right? This is the kind of stuff you're working on, the connection in the relationship.
Got it. So almost kind of like being the best friend.
The best friend, exactly. The best friend aspect of love.
Okay.
The second ingredient he talks about is something he calls passion. Now, this one's pretty self-explanatory. This is the sexual arousal, the lust, that can't keep your hands off of each other part of love, right? A lot of times, if this is the only ingredient you have, you end up with a fling or a one-night stand, right? This is that kind of sharp feelings of things, right? But as we know, with a lot of sharp feelings, and if your brain is flooded with all these beautiful chemicals, it doesn't necessarily always last, right? Mm-hmm. So here, we can talk about how love is actually a drug.
Oh yeah, I guess passion is one of those things, right? You get aroused, you feel a rush, and you're chasing this kind of drug, which I think a lot of people who are addicted to sex, for example, they chase a lot, but doesn't necessarily encompass three ingredients, just one ingredient.
They're chasing the dopamine
Yes.
spike of changing out partners all the time.
Yeah.
And so that there you can look at love from a neuroscientific standpoint, right? Where love, if you look at a brain in love, you'd have a hard time telling the difference between that brain with a brain that's on cocaine. It's
Really?
it's very similar.
Whoa. So if you scan the brain of someone high on cocaine and someone high on love, it's very similar to each other.
Right. And so knowing how like you're affected by the chemicals of love really helps keep you out of trouble, I would say.
Right. And I think that's something we've always talked about, just being aware, right, of things that can affect you emotionally, psychologically. Like, for example, we talked a lot about body language, how you position yourself, how your eyes are communicating all the time. But just being aware that if you have this feeling where you're high, it's not, it may not be love. It's just one ingredient of love.
Yeah. And usually in long-term love, eventually the initial dopamine rush dissipates and it shifts to a different kind of love, a slower kind of love, a cuddly kind of love, right?
Oh, okay.
And this is during the dopamine time, you're really blind. You can't really make good decisions. So that's why generally it's not a good idea to, like, for example, rush into getting married in the first 6 months of a relationship, right? Because you're literally incapacitated.
You're high.
You're high,
on love, basically.
Right? And the last ingredient that Sternberg puts forward in this triangular theory of love is what he calls commitment. And commitment is the willingness to essentially invest resources and time into a relationship.
Wow. So it's like trying to give something back, like committing resources, like, I'm going to buy a gift, I'm going to, do something for you.
It's the partnership aspect of
the partnership.
For example, if this was the only ingredient present, right, the love might be something like a political power couple or, in the Middle Ages, an arranged marriage between two kingdoms. There's commitment, but it might be lacking the connection and the passion aspect.
So kind of like a lot of the Hollywood celebrity power couples, maybe they're very powerful for a reason because they have a commitment to advance each other's careers.
Right.
But maybe they've lost the passion or maybe they've lost the friendship. They don't have the other ingredients to make it last. That's why you see a lot of these power couples maybe fall out.
Yeah.
Because they lack the other two sides of love.
Yeah. Or potentially, like, they might be together and they only stay together. Because this is where you look at love as a strategy.
Okay.
Right?
Is this tied to game theory
This is the game theory of love.
Got it.
So the three lenses that you can look at love from is one is the lens of relationship psychology, right? Which is love as a connection. It's the best friend vibes of love. It's love as a drug, which is looking at it from the standpoint of neuroscience and neurochemistry. And then lastly, love as a strategy, as an evolutionary game theory strategy.
Yeah, because there's advantages to being in love and being in a committed relationship.
Yes. Or like, why does love even exist?
I guess from an evolutionary standpoint, there's reasons.
There are reasons. And so today, we're going to go through the evolutionary game theory of love. We're going to wear that hat.
Got it.
We're going to put on the evolutionary game theorist hat, and we're going to look to answer some questions about evolutionary puzzles.
Alrighty.
And knowing these things as you navigate the relationship world might give people insights about, like, why are certain things happening?
Got it.
Right?
All right, let's dive in.
Okay. So this is going to be kind of a darker side of love.
Wait,
right?
we're going dark?
We're going dark.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Because then it makes everything else make sense. It's going to be a darker, potentially, side of love, or a kind of a more cold, calculating side of love.
Very black and white dry. We're going to cut through this.
But we're going to get to the warm fuzzies once we start looking at it from the relationship psychology standpoint.
Okay.
All right. So the best way, I think, to download people on the evolutionary game theory of love is to look at it from solving 5 evolutionary puzzles. And if you get these 5 evolutionary puzzles under your hat, then you probably understand the vast majority of what you need to understand of why relationships do what they do. And so the 5 evolutionary puzzles are as so. Why sex? Why male and female? why are men so ugly? Why stay together? And why cheat?
Whoa, those are some interesting, very profound questions. All right. Let's go into the first one.
Okay. All right. So the first evolutionary puzzle we're trying to solve is why sex?
Okay.
Every day, every human being is involved in a hidden, secret arms race, a biological Cold War, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
If on the day you were born, a bacteria was born that same day, within a single human lifetime, under the worst possible conditions, that one single bacteria can generate 30,000 generations.
Wow.
Right? In the best possible conditions, if it had every resource it needed, it can generate 2.1 million generations.
Wow.
That's a lot of great grandkids.
Right.
Think about
Yeah, that's a lot.
This is important because we are constantly in competition with every other species on this planet, right? And so the competition between the big and the small is the reason why sex exists. Because if you think about it, human beings, we only have had about 15,000 generations total as human beings.
Wow.
We're 300,000 generations from being chimpanzees, from branching off from where the chimpanzees are. But in a single lifetime, if a bacteria can have 2.1 million generations, they're operating on the speed of reproduction and evolution that is just far beyond what we can do.
So they're a little bit more advanced than us when it comes to reproducing.
Because they're small, because they're cloning themselves, right?
Okay.
So the question is, why are we not cloning ourselves?
Yeah, why are we so different as a species? Why do we replicate so much slower at a slower pace?
Well, because we're bigger, right? You know, a bacteria is very, very small, requires very little resources, right? But any sort of multicellular organism, at some point in time when that branched off in history, they had to come up with a completely new way of copying themselves.
Okay.
And the only way to essentially, every single time you have these generations of these small things, these bacteria, you're running the chance that they might crack the code and be able to kill all of us.
Is that what they're trying to do, the bacteria?
Potentially, because there's a lot of malicious bacteria, right? If you think about
They're
it.
trying to kill us off.
Yes. So it is this battle. And the only way big creatures are able to stave this off is by shuffling our genetic deck.
Okay.
Because it's not fast enough to clone ourselves, right?
Got it.
One of the ways you can kind of make this like very real for people is that we're on the verge of losing tequila.
Tequila?
Tequila.
Like the liquor?
The liquor.
Why?
Because
of
blue
the plant?
agave, primarily, the way we create our blue agave fields is through something akin to cloning.
Okay.
And so if one fungal infection shows up, because they're very susceptible to fungal infections, it can wipe out all of blue agave.
You know, this happened before, I think, in the wine industry.
Yes.
Where a fungus nearly wiped out all of European grapes and vineyards. And the only thing that's solved that problem was grafting North American or American grapevines that were resistant to that fungus. But if we didn't have that divide, right, grapes and wine would just be gone.
We should be gone. Cloning is a really bad strategy for large organisms.
Yeah.
I mean, similar things have happened before, like the Great Potato Famine in Ireland, right? It was related something to, things not having enough genetic diversity. So every single time you are involved in sex, you are doing your part in this battle. Every single time you're doing the boom chicka wow wow, you are part of this grand battle to essentially keep the human race a moving target for all these small organisms that are basically able to evolve so much faster than us. It's ridiculous, right? And so our kids have to be different from us. So cloning is a bad strategy.
Okay, makes sense.
So that's evolutionary puzzle number one. Why is there sex? Any creature that is a multicellular organism has to basically shuffle their deck because single cell organisms are trying to get after us.
Okay, so it's just a strategy.
It's a strategy.
Evolutionary strategy.
Right. And so the game theory has pushed this solution of people shuffling their genetic decks through sex as the solution to that specific problem. Evolutionary puzzle number two is why male and female?
Do bacteria have male and female?
No,
No.
they don't need to.
It's just kind of mammals, maybe, I mean,
A
I
lot
see
of creatures have.
a lot of
Plants
creatures,
have male
yeah,
and female.
Plants do. You're right.
Plants can be both male and female.
Yeah, that's right. Because it has the pollen.
The pollen,
and
yeah.
the flower. Interesting.
So, early sexual reproduction, basically where organisms are shuffling their genetic deck, we're basically blobs maybe floating around in some ocean. And there's a time called isogamy, or this type of thing, where all the blobs are basically the same, and they could just kind of bump into each other and fuse, and you have sexual reproduction. You're shuffling the deck. But anytime you have limited resources and you have competitors in an environment, now you start having game theory apply, where all the players in a particular environment need to start maximizing their strategy to get the best possible payoffs.
Okay.
Right. And what was interesting is that two strategies began to emerge out of this environment that seemed to really work. And the middle path didn't work and got wiped out. So strategy one is kind of the apocalypse prepper strategy. So you're creating a reproductive cell.
Okay.
Right. And you decide to give that reproductive cell every resource possible. Food, vitamins, nutrients. You basically prep it for full-on survival. This is expensive, right? But you are maximizing the chance that that one reproductive cell will survive, right? Mm-hmm. The alternate strategy is you go for quantity and you start generating many cheap copies with no survival resources whatsoever, completely not able to survive, with the expectation that 99.999999% of those reproductive cells will not survive, but if just one gets through, you win the game.
You see that a lot with, like, for example, like fish, or where they lay like hundreds of eggs.
Yes.
Or like maybe smaller creatures where they know that most of them aren't going to survive. But if that one survived, that's good enough.
And so what we're describing here basically is that sperm is that cheap strategy of mass production. It's literally DNA with a tail. And the highly prepared quality strategy was the egg. And so initially you didn't necessarily, you have these reproductive cells bouncing around, and they all kind of mix and match. But as organisms start kind of heading in one direction or the other, it created such a stable system that any divergence from this one extreme strategy and the other extreme strategy gets wiped out. And so only two strategies survived.
Interesting. So it's a combination of the two. It just found a balance between the two.
Yeah, it just emerged, just like you set the parameters of this evolutionary game, and this is what emerged. Are you going for the are you trying to flood the market, or are you trying to create something very, very quality?
And it found the solution.
Right?
Which is both. That's funny.
Which is both, right? So if you think about it in general terms, you produce, you get one egg a month, right? Or you get millions of sperm a day. It's just this massive, like, there's nothing in the middle. It's just this two extremes.
Yeah.
And so this sets up essentially the supply and demand question of relationships, right?
Okay.
Why, in evolutionary terms, the female is anyone producing the egg, the expensive reproductive cell, and the male is the one producing the sperm.
The cheap.
Right. So, for example, in like seahorses, I think, are the ones that actually carry the baby. The men are the ones that carry the
males,
baby.
Yeah.
So from evolutionary categorization, that's the difference. It's like, are you doing the cheap strategy, the high quantity strategy, or are you doing the high quality strategy?
Oh, interesting.
And so here is where, like, a lot of the aspects of relationships come up. Like, why, generally speaking, are women more picky and men a lot less picky? And men generally have to be chosen. They have to kind of act out to play a certain part to demonstrate their quality and abilities. And women kind of choose who their mate is.
I mean, you see this a lot in nature, for example, in birds.
Yes.
Right? It's like the male bird has to kind of do a dance or sing a song, and the female gets to choose yes or no.
Exactly.
Like, so why is the case? I mean, I kind of just always thought of it like, women are kind of like the gatekeepers, right?
Exactly.
They're the ones who can open the gate or close the gate, and they're the ones who kind of pick out the traits that, are species would need, I guess, are good quality traits that we would need to evolve to maybe a higher level.
Yeah, because
that's how I thought
they're
about
making the
it.
biggest investment, right?
Oh, that's true. You're absolutely right. And women do have to pay by giving birth.
Yes.
And 9 months giving birth, and they're kind of almost, they have to be choosy. They can't just pick any random person.
And even if women weren't giving birth, right, the fact that the egg is so much rarer than the millions of sperm a day still creates this kind of supply thing.
Yeah.
But you're totally right about this whole birth thing, because this is where you get to evolutionary puzzle number 3.
Okay.
Why are men so ugly?
Well, I don't know if ugly is kind of extreme, but women are very beautiful. I don't know if it's, we're very practical.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I kind of like the fact that we don't have to be pretty. Like,
No,
we
we
can
don't.
just be functional, and women will appreciate that. Right.
Yes. No, you're totally on it. But the question is why? Why does it work that way?
I don't know. I never really asked myself that.
In any species, right, where, like, again, the female of the species are choosing between males, right? And if it's purely for sexual selection, just getting a sperm donor, in any of those species, you have this thing that pops up where the males of the species are very flashy and very beautiful, and the females are really boring.
Yeah, like with birds.
Like, so peacocks, right?
Yeah.
So the guy's basically showing off, like, take my sperm. and the females of the species, the peahen, they don't have to advertise anything. So they don't have to spend time being, creating this kind of whole thing, right? And so the same thing shows up with, like, why do moose have antlers, right? Like, if there's no females around a male moose, their antlers fall off.
Really?
Yeah,
That's true?
it's an ornamentation.
Wow.
So in any species where there's pure sexual selection, where you're just looking for a sperm donor, the males have to become some way attractive or beautiful. There's some sort of symbol. The lion's mane, the silverback gorilla has a silver spot on their back. There's some sort of symbol of what kind of you show off your
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
fitness.
So let me ask you a question then. How come for humans, why is that a little different? We're not the ones putting on makeup.
No, we're not.
So why are we so different from other animals?
So I like this part. It seems like humans walked into the evolutionary casino and put all their chips on brain.
Oh.
So the human brain is our peacock's tail,
Aha. There we go.
right?
Light bulb moment right there.
All art, all poetry, building architecture, doing science, making mathematics, all these things are not necessary survival traits. They are emergent property, a result of our peacock's tail.
Interesting.
That our brain just kept getting bigger, and we kept solving and doing all these weird, interesting things, like making podcasts. Like, what is the survival purpose of making a podcast other than maybe showing off some aspects of, like, what your brain is able to solve in terms of reasoning or questions?
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, when women go on podcasts, they make sure they're wearing the right outfit, they're coordinated, they have perfect makeup, they want the lighting to be great. For us, we just show up in whatever.
Well, we try to impress people, like, with either our thoughts, right? Or if you're like a rock musician, you go out there, you sing your song, or if you're a computer programmer, you can start a business. So essentially, our brains allow us to demonstrate talents, and those talents can potentially accumulate resources, which is a way of us basically showing off how much talent we have.
Yes. And again, the substance, right? The information that we're giving, that's what we're kind of showing off.
Yeah, that's
not
what we're showing
necessarily
off.
our looks.
Right?
Got it.
So if you really think about it, like, the reason we landed astronauts on the moon was to just get people laid. And I'm sure during that process, a lot of astronauts got laid. A lot of rocket scientists got laid. But really, at the end of the day, John F. Kennedy got laid. For sure. He's like, we're going to the moon.
I know. We're going to go to the moon, and we're going to press women so that we can get laid.
So the human peacock tail is the brain.
The ultimate peacock tail. Let's do the impossible.
So that solves evolutionary puzzle number 3.
Got it.
Evolutionary puzzle number 4 helps us answer also why we're not, let's say, men are not beautiful. right? And the way you can sort of tell men are not beautiful per se is how similar the male and a female of a species are. So in species where sexual selection is like the predominant reason why animals get together and mate, the males look very different from the females. And so the bigger that difference is, the more it's probably a sexual selection thing. But in humans, we're kind of average. We're not that far apart, right? And so it also implies that it's not a one direction choosing, it's a two direction choosing.
So it's a little bit more balanced again.
There's a little bit more balance, right? And so the question is why, right?
Okay.
The reason why is human babies suck at surviving.
I can relate to that.
You know this. You're a new father.
Yeah.
So baby deer, right? They're wobbling around within like minutes of being born. Like they're walking around. But a human kid can't even hold their head up for like months, right?
Yeah.
Much less survive. And the reason for this, again, we went all in on the evolutionary casino on the brain. And so human brains are massive. We're born with heads that are already 25% of our body size, right? Compared to like a chimpanzee, their head is 10% of their body size.
I didn't know that.
Right.
Interesting.
And our brains keep growing and they triple in size by age 3.
Wow.
Right? The problem is that if we were going to wait to pop out when we are able to walk around, like horses can like run almost immediately as soon as they're born.
Yeah.
We would have to stay in there probably 18 months, but then we wouldn't fit. We wouldn't be able to get out.
So basically, we're developing outside of the womb.
Essentially, we're developing outside of the womb.
It takes 3 years for that brain to develop. Because I have like a 1.5-year-old kid, and I feel like it's just trying to keep him alive most of the time. And it's scary and it's frightening because he doesn't know anything, and he's always doing something to potentially hurt himself. And it's like, and so your one job as a parent is just make sure he doesn't get hurt or doesn't do anything worse. And that's so true. And I think every parent can relate to that.
Yeah. So babies pop out at what is considered a good enough point. We're half baked.
Oh my god!
And then the rest of our development happens outside of the womb, right?
Wow, that's so true. Yeah.
And so in that situation, the why, the evolutionary puzzle that we're solving, is that we're no longer choosing people simply on sexual selection of how hot somebody is, right? How big somebody's peacock tail is. Both sides are now looking for partnership potential because it takes years to get a baby to a point where they survive.
Yeah.
And one of the advantages is that we as human beings were born with a fairly blank slate. While other animals have like wired instincts, we have to learn a lot of things, which makes us incredibly flexible. It's a little bit of a risky maneuver, but because we have to learn all these things, we've been able to essentially be flexible and develop and become, well, what the human race is today. It's a very strange thing that this we had this runaway evolution where we're now, the dominant species on the planet, and we're, going into space and doing all these crazy things.
Yeah.
But it's because of this weird little risk. So we have highly flexible, highly big brains.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have this extended period of time. We have to be kept alive. But during that time, we can be molded into very, very creative, clever, intelligent, interesting individuals.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, if evolution is just a game, and we found this really unique strategy where we have to use our brains to impress women instead of just having the best looking feathers.
Yeah.
That kind of pushes us to do something that's beyond what just birds can do by just trying to look pretty, right? For their mate, we actually have to be constructive and do crazy, crazy, amazing things as human beings as we do.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's, I guess, in terms of the game theory, we've almost kind of found this little hack.
Yeah, we found like a little canyon between everything else and just sprinted through it.
Right. And because none of all other animals in nature, they don't do any of these things.
Yeah.
But we do, but we're so unique as a species. That's very fascinating.
Yeah. So the partnership of keeping a child alive, right? Oftentimes it's called a pair bond if you're looking at it scientifically. But a pair bond is love. It's the glue.
Okay.
The partnership to keep a little one alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
For them to survive.
Yeah.
That is why love basically exists.
Yeah, you're right. And when you have a kid, you have to have a commitment, right? And then you have to have some sort of, I don't know, bond with the kid.
Yeah.
But it's a long-term investment to keep a kid alive. And that ties into the whole family aspect of things, of love, right?
Yeah.
Because that ties in. You have the passion that creates the kid. You have the friendship, the initial friendship that builds that relationship between the mom and the dad. And you have this commitment with this child that kind of bonds you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's very
unique. You can still be successful even if there's no passion or connection between people. Like, people just get together and they start families.
True.
Again, there's arranged marriages or marriages of convenience, and this still works. But then you're probably missing out on something. Most people, I think, want to experience true love to some extent, but really, in the long-term game theory, the family unit is the key, right? It's like, keeping your kids alive.
Yeah.
To take everyone kind of investing and working together to take care of each other.
Yeah.
And
that in itself is kind of like an act of love, right?
Yeah. And so when people are pairing up and finding pair bonds, both sides have to sort of impress each other, right? So obviously, guys look more for like things like signs of fertility and youth and health, right? They're generally looking like they want an attractive girl.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they want somebody who is kind and is stable and who they can build a long-term partnership with. And vice versa, women obviously are looking for guys who have talents and the ability to provide resources and take care of the family, right? And then if they find a correct partner, then they have a long-term success in terms of kids and stuff like that. And so that is, the reason why men are so ugly in the evolutionary standpoint, right? Is that, again, we're more average, so it's actually more even dating field, right? This counteracts a lot of this kind of alpha male thinking that sometimes happens like on the internet. I mean, that still plays a part, right?
Yeah.
Like an alpha male going around, can potentially generate like attraction and passion and sexual arousal, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to actual long-term stable relationships and how women choose partners, a lot of times they don't choose the alphas of the alpha males. They might lust after them for a short period of time.
Yeah.
But long-term relationships is kind of this balancing act between it's talent and stability.
Ah, yeah. Well, that's good news for a lot of guys out there who aren't gifted with the perfect, good-looking alpha male genes, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys out there who I think wrongfully kind of chase that alpha male kind of ideology, but you're saying you don't necessarily have to. It's not. We're different from other animals. We're not gorillas.
We're not gorillas.
We're humans.
And we live in an incredible time to be alive because there are so many different ways to essentially demonstrate your talent nowadays.
Yeah.
Right? You no longer have to be swinging an axe. You could be, again, you could be an artist, you could be a computer programmer, you could be an entrepreneur. There's so many different ways of demonstrating your talent. Humor is a very powerful way of demonstrating talent. Somebody who's able to be funny and tell stories. Yeah. These are all ways that we're sort of showing off our personal peacock's tail.
Yeah.
Which is essentially our brain.
Yeah.
All the most beautiful things in the world that have been created sort of are a side effect of this thing. The reason the Sistine Chapel is so beautiful is just this runaway evolution of this peacock's tail, which is our brain.
Because guys wanted to get laid.
Yeah. So as a side question that kind of comes up out of this, like why we stay together question is like, are pair bonds meant to last a lifetime? And this might be a tough question because anthropologists estimate that getting a kid to survivability age takes about 4 to 7 years.
Okay.
Right? Basically long enough to get the kid walking, talking, just be able to survive. Interestingly, divorce peaks at around 4 to 7 years.
So when people break up,
right,
4 to 7 years.
Whether or not they have kids or not, but it seems like there is a little bit of a timing aspect
No,
relationships.
I believe it. I think there was a stat where I think the average age or average years it takes, or the highest average was about 7 years when people get divorced. And I think that's where the term 7-year itch comes from.
Ooh, actually, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so that's after 7 years, just something happens in relationships where you get the itch
Yeah.
to maybe break up. And it's been proven statistically that that's about the average time a relationship lasts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like one of those things where if you can get past that somehow, then maybe you have a long-term relationship, but it's kind of difficult for some people.
Yeah, I guess what it is that from a biological standpoint, human beings are monogamous, but we're more geared towards serial monogamy in the sense that when people are only living to like 30 years old in like in some ancestral environment, yeah, you have one time to have like one like serious long-term relationship, you know. When people are now living up to 80 years old, it's trickier, right? And so, you know, in the U.S., it's pretty commonly known that somewhere between 40 and 50% of first marriages end in divorce, right? And the median length of the relationship is 8 years. The people who make it past 50 years is about 20% of couples. So it's possible. There for sure are couples that are able to stay together for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
But just so people are not in complete denial about some of these things, is having this long-term commitment is hard. And it requires work. And again, biologically, it's not mandated that a couple needs to stay together forever. It's become kind of more of a societal thing. It's a cultural choice, right?
Okay.
Where, you know, you get married and you stay together for a long time.
Yeah.
There's other tribes throughout the world who don't necessarily have that. They're more closely to that serial monogamous thing where people kind of bounce from relationship to relationship. But just keeping in mind that like if somebody they didn't have a successful first marriage, right? That's not necessarily out of the norm. Something like that, you know.
Yeah.
There seems to be this cadence in relationships, which brings us to the evolutionary puzzle 5.
Okay.
Why cheat?
Okay, that's going to be a tricky one to.
Yeah. Again, this is a darker part of the conversation, but I think it's important for people to think about it because the numbers are not good.
Really?
The numbers are not good.
Okay.
And it's something to be aware of and potentially over time try to figure out how everybody in their own personal journey is going to deal with these questions, whether it happens with your partner or whether you are the adulterer or whatever it is, or how you deal with your own urges and drives, right? Again, if you're thinking about 80, most people are like living up to 80 years old now, right? It's hard, right? So some of the numbers just kind of get a little morbid.
Okay,
right now.
these numbers might be a little scary, so give it to them.
So for the U.S., 28% of married men cheat. I've cheated at some point.
One out of every 5 men.
13% of married women.
Oh, so women are less.
Less, but still. Like I think some people might believe that men are the only ones cheating and women are a little bit less. But generally, yeah, men cheat more, but women cheat quite a bit too.
Okay.
And that's according to the General Social Survey in 2022. Among just committed monogamous relationships, so not married, 46%.
What? Cheat?
I've cheated in their lifetime.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's the health
like
testing
a coin flip.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So again, it's something to kind of keep in mind. Like again, these evolutionary pressures are pretty strong, and you have to kind of, I don't know, figure out how everyone has their own personal journey, try to figure out how they're going to deal with it. Just lifetime, 71% of people have admitted to cheating at some point.
Wow.
Not necessarily in their current relationship, but at some point in their
70%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
okay.
So this
is like a reality check, I think we're all facing.
Yeah. So and then the global estimate, because we're looking at U.S. numbers here, somewhere between 20 and 40% of committed relationships globally, there's some sort of cheating going on.
So 1 in 4.
Yeah, and again, it could be just maybe like one time.
Okay.
Like one time mistake. Obviously, there's people who are serial cheaters.
Yeah.
But it's something to kind of keep in mind. Now, with with men, it's pretty obvious why they cheat, right? The biological drive is to kind of spread your genetic code, and there's a big payoff, right? Because if our ancestors cheated a lot and spread the genetic code, then it generated more people who are cheating because that's a survival tactic to pass along your genetic code. But it's really tricky about the question of why women cheat, because women can only have one kid at a time.
Yeah, that's true.
And so for this evolutionary puzzle, there's two competing theories, but there's one that seems to be kind of winning out, right? One is the mate switching hypothesis, which is the idea you're double checking if you can switch to a different mate. And the other one is a little crazier. And when I first heard about this in my evolutionary psych class way back when, I was like, whoa, that is scary. It's something called the dual mating hypothesis.
The what?
Dual mating hypothesis.
Dual mating hypothesis.
Now, this exists in a lot of animal species, and the question is, does this exist in our animal species?
Wait, I heard something about this. Is this when you have multiple partners? So you have increased
kind of
percentage or chance of success?
It's similar. What it is let's talk about birds because it's going to be a little cleaner.
Okay.
A female bird might get into a long-term relationship with another bird who's very good at building nests.
Okay.
And then secretly go hook up with another bird that is like physically more badass or something. And that is the dual mating hypothesis, which is essentially...
Oh my God.
And again, this is pretty scary stuff, but depending on which culture you're looking at, what situation you're looking at, somewhere between 1% and 10% of kids aren't the kids of the dad.
Wait, what was that? How many?
Somewhere between 1% and 10%, depending on what kind of study you're looking at.
10%.
So
it's like the Maury Povich clip. Like,
it is.
I am not the father.
And so the tricky bit is that a lot of times when they're running these studies, the fathers are already suspicious when they're running the math.
Oh my God.
So it's probably not 10%. It's probably not 1 in 10, but somewhere between 1 in 100 and 1 in 10.
Okay.
So this is like a thing that seems to be validated. So there is this drive that is kind of built into us. Again, everyone's sort of trying to, from an evolutionary point, trying to play the best game they can.
Wow. So women are just kind of trying to optimize and maximize their potential.
They're not. No one's thinking about this psychologically, right?
Like, yeah, but like, maybe biologically.
Biologically,
somehow.
right? Again, guys' eyes stray.
Yeah.
There's a reason. Like, you're constantly really into, looking at hot models on Instagram or something. Or there's this thing. And again, the worst case scenario, if a guy cheats, right, and he ends up having a child with another woman, is maybe his resources, if he's in an invested relationship with somebody, might need to shift over or be spread between two mates. But the worst case scenario, if a woman cheats on a man, is that he's not raising his own kid, right? Which kind of puts into context why, for example, being a virgin till marriage is such a big part of a lot of cultures.
Yeah.
Right? Specifically for women, because when you didn't have paternity tests, the only way you would know the kids are your own.
Oh, yeah, that's like a cultural kind of thing.
And then, your kingdom is being inherited by your kids.
Yeah.
Is this thing.
Yeah.
This question, this
That's really fascinating just thinking about that again.
Yeah.
Because there's the biological side to everything. And everything ties into the optimal path of this game theory that's built into the evolutionary process. Right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of frightening if you think about it, because it is very black and white, and it is a little cold. But I think a lot of us really have to kind of understand the truth, the facts, the reality check that we have to realize. Hey, 70% of the people admit to cheating. Right?
At some point in their life.
At some point in their life.
Not necessarily in your current relationship, but, at some point.
But it still could be, in a marriage, 13% or 13 to 20%.
Yeah.
1 in 5 potentially that they might cheat, and just having that kind of realistic understanding.
Yeah.
It's I mean, we're humans. We're not perfect.
Okay, one interesting, maybe practical tidbit, but also kind of terrible, is there is this statistic.
Okay. What is this?
Okay,
It's a ruler.
If you measure your index finger
Okay. Hold on.
and your ring finger,
Okay. Okay.
just roughly speaking, we're
Half an inch.
half an inch for your index finger? No, for the length.
Oh, 3 and 3.5 inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's your ring finger?
Oh, my ring finger.
No, it's your index and then your ring finger.
Oh, index and ring. 3, almost 3.5. 3 and what is that? I don't. Almost 3.5. I'm not sure what the exact measurement is.
So the first one was 3 and 3.
3.5. Yeah,
Okay. Well, so
something like that.
Broadly speaking, that's pretty close, right?
It's pretty close.
Right. So there is this very interesting thing that comes up where they have been able to predict promiscuity in people.
Is that good or bad?
Based on the length of the ratio between your index finger and your ring finger.
Wait, I think mine's the same. Almost.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look at it right now.
And most people, it's going to be more or less the same. Kind of
Yeah.
the average for men is 0.95 is the ratio.
Okay.
So like your index finger is a little shorter than your ring finger.
Got it.
But what it is seems to be an indication of is how much testosterone or estrogen you were hit with in the womb.
Oh.
Which then seem to apply to a lot of different things.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things that it applies to is kind of aggressiveness and promiscuity. So if somebody is, has that ratio that's like a little shorter, right? And if you're seeing that in yourself, you might be somebody who is a little bit more aggressive and promiscuous.
Oh, okay.
And in terms of this question of cheating, you might have to ask yourself some ethical questions about how you are going to navigate that in the world. So this is the 2D, 4D ratio. That people want to look it up and kind of do their own measurements. I actually did my own measurements, and I'm a little bit more on the feminine side, which is kind of interesting.
So wait, what is the ratio? Is it like the difference?
So basically, you measure. You have to kind of accurately measure it. You can either measure it from the front, from the crease to the top,
Okay.
and then from this crease to the top, and then you just divide the index finger by the ring finger, and then you get a number. It's going to be somewhere around 1, but it can go down to like 8.9 or 8.3.
Okay.
If you have a very short index finger.
Oh. Okay.
And it's an indicator of like how much testosterone you got hit by when you were in the womb. And it also predicts things like gambling behavior and other types of things.
So the shorter your index finger is, basically
is more testosterone. Yeah.
Wow.
And the longer it is less it is.
Man,
so women generally have most women generally have their index finger longer.
Interesting.
Right.
Wow.
And so that's one of those weird little things to kind of keep an eye on. And again, like, you can't really control what happened there, right? And so you might be kind of wired to be more promiscuous. And so you might kind of have to try to figure out how to navigate that in
I bet you every guy is going to be looking at their fingers now. Like, what ratio am I?
They're going to be trying to get like finger reduction surgeries.
That is crazy.
It doesn't work in reverse.
Make it shorter, please. No.
So in terms of like, again, the whole cheating question, again, the numbers are pretty dark, but the question is like, how do you navigate it? I don't have like a direct answer, especially it's the fact that we have these like, super long lives that are happening. But I would say denial is a bad strategy in terms of like denying that this is part of us.
Yeah.
Because again, when you deny some of the darker aspects of our psychology, a lot of times you fall victim to it.
Yeah.
At a moment where you weren't really thinking about it.
We have to be realistic about these expectations.
And from the aspect of, if you think about one of the ingredients of love, according to Sternberg, is this commitment thing.
Yeah.
Prioritizing the kids and the family unit is the most important thing. Right? Yeah. So do your best not to ruin that. Right? Avoid making promises you can't keep.
Okay.
Some of the weird, interesting ways that this question has been dealt with in different cultures, because obviously we live in the United States, which is primarily like a Judeo-Christian influenced culture. And so cheating, according to the 10 Commandments, is a no-no. But in other places, it comes up in interesting ways. So, for example, the Inuit, kind of in their culture, they have this spouse swapping thing for survival reasons.
Really?
And the reason for that is when you are in situations where at any moment in time somebody might just die because you're up in the frigid Arctic, you want to make sure your family gets taken care of. So it's like they have this thing about just trying to increase bonds in between family units.
Wow.
And so that's kind of an interesting way they're sort of dealing with it. In Japan, they have the whole salaryman hostess clubs situation where it happens, but they don't talk about it.
I see.
Like kind of people know that it's happening.
Yeah.
France and Italy have these cultures of mistresses and misters.
Got it. Yeah.
Again, they kind of make the family unit is paramount. But people, if they have to, keep the family unit together and try to deal with it in a more ethical way.
Yeah, the whole mistress culture was so prevalent back in the 40s and 50s. It was almost normal.
Yeah, you watch Mad Men.
Yeah, if you watch Mad Men, it was almost expected to have a mistress. But I guess maybe back then they valued the family so much to keep it intact. They kind of allowed this behavior.
Yeah, instead of breaking up, I guess they would just do.
Exactly.
That's
they
kind
saw
of the
the
thing.
bigger picture of things. Yeah.
Yeah, like for example, in Italy specifically, in Sicilian culture, it's a very big thing. Again, the idea is that the family unit is the most important thing. So whatever gets done, just don't ruin the family, right?
Yeah.
Again, this is not saying that people should do this, but again, when you're looking at these numbers, the numbers are really bad.
Yeah.
And of course, lately there's always been these things of like the rise of polyamory, and people are trying out new unconventional things. I think potentially maybe one of the solutions might come up in terms of adult entertainment and AI adult entertainment. So people would not necessarily need to step out of their marriage to kind of, again, just address whatever emotional need they're looking for.
That's a scary thought, but
It is, but I don't know. Do you think that's worse or better than actually somebody going out?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of emotional version of cheating, but I see both men and women kind of doing that because women are lonely too.
Yeah.
And maybe they're looking for someone to talk to, and chat with, because women are very social in that way. So I can see chatbots with like companionships for women
Potentially.
but I for men it's more of the sexual kind of.
It is a little bit. I think it's a little simpler to solve it for men because if you think about it, like just adult movies, that's that kind of solves it. So that you can sort of kind of get rid of that need without having to break up your relationship.
Yeah, it's funny though because women love reading romance novels.
Yes,
that's huge, and I think most men don't even realize that maybe their partner is reading these really salacious material that's very explicit.
I was watching this famous professor from Stanford. She's one of the top experts on dopamine and on addiction, and her personal addiction that she went through is a romance novel addiction.
No way.
And what broke her was the Kindle. is the infinite
delivery device.
The infinite supply, and it basically took over her life.
Oh my God!
In so a lot of ways,
to romance novels. That's crazy.
So you're on point there. Like romance novels for sure.
Wow.
It's
fascinating.
You just need to look at the huge success of 50 Shades of Grey.
That's true. Yeah.
Or 365 Days, or all these different things.
Yeah.
The romance novel does that for people.
Yeah.
So it's a tough question, but again, people can make it through long-term relationships without cheating. But it's one of those things that it's best not to be in denial about the fact that that stuff kind of exists, so you can navigate it in whatever way you think is best.
Yeah.
And so to kind of finish off this talk of the lens of the evolutionary game theory and how it applies to the commitment ingredient of love, the practical recommendations.
Yes.
Some stuff to actually put into use.
Okay.
So if you're looking at love from this point of view, love is a strategy. Right? It's a strategy to basically convince partners to invest in each other. So thinking about how you are investing in your partner and how they are investing in you.
Okay.
And a lot of times this is the long-term scale in most relationships, because when love is just a spark of a moment, that's a very short time scale. But when you're looking at being with somebody for decades, it is an investment. It's a partnership. So right off the bat for everyone, maximize your health.
Okay.
Right. So beauty, in the most simple form, is the way it's a shortcut to signaling health in some form or other. And for a lot of people, making sure that you are not even just for yourself, for your partner, being the healthiest version of yourself you can be. So one, you can survive longer. Men usually live about 7 years less than women, right? So you don't want to leave your wife all alone if you guys are going for the long haul.
Got it.
So maximizing your health, it seems like a pretty good strategy. Just to think about that is like, it's not even just for you, it's for the long-term potential of your relationship and for your kids, the family unit. Specifically for men, also kind of a physical thing, but then we'll get into more strategy. Get bigger shoulders.
Okay.
That's like the one thing. So all the studies that show about what seems to be attractive to women about men. Yeah, jaws are kind of cool, and if you have a nice jaw, it's great. But it's actually not a big factor, like long term. Like you have somebody be very attractive and kind of have more of a baby face or not be entirely symmetrical. But shoulder to waist ratio is the most consistent thing that's kind of out there. And you don't have to go to like the gym and like become a bodybuilder. But one thing you'll notice is that whether you're looking at bodybuilders or you're looking at like male models walking down the catwalks, right?
Yeah.
Male models are super skinny, but wide shoulders.
Like Michael Phelps. Be a swimmer.
And what you were talking about earlier about like the importance of like hunting in our evolutionary history, right? Like what are shoulders for? It's like for throwing things. It's for like doing things, right? And so if you were going to do one thing for a guy to kind of at least physically try to maximize your attractiveness, it seems like the shoulders is a very good bang for your buck.
Nice.
It's like training your shoulders, trying to get your shoulders bigger. It's considered, other than the lats, the biggest muscle by volume in your upper body.
Interesting.
Most people think it's like the biceps or something, but like getting larger shoulders.
That makes sense, but again, it's a practical thing because if you're throwing a javelin or rocks.
Yeah.
And
I think even like if you you have the shoulder waist ratio, the two parts of the formula is one, you get bigger shoulders, and then two, you lean down, right? But even if you're not leaned down, it makes men look more attractive. I think that's probably one of the keys to the dad bod phenomenon. Is that you can have a guy, he's bigger in the shoulders, but he could still have a little fluff in the around the waist. Yeah. But if you truly want to maximize it, it's big shoulders and try to kind of lean down, like below 15% body fat if you can. Yeah. Especially if you're in the dating market, still just looking for people to be, to attract people. But then developing talent and resources for men, right? So if you think about resources are kind of a signal of the talent you have. If you're a good salesman, you make a lot of sales, you aggregate money, right? If you're a good leader, your resources, resources don't necessarily have to be money. Even the fact that having a reputation in a community, that people will follow you, being a good leader, that is a resource in itself, right? So maximizing your talents, looking at which games or hierarchies you can play in and basically be the best in. Right. For some people, it'll be like doing mathematics. For some people, it's, playing a sport. But looking for where you can maximize your talents and trying to be the best you possibly can be in that field. And there's so many different ways you could do that.
Yeah. I mean, you're using your brain. You're peacocking through your brain.
You're peacocking through your brain.
Yeah.
Right. And then for the long-term relationship aspect, it's actually very important to try to signal stability. Because when women are trying to make this long-term investment choice for commitment, it seems like there are situations where like women are attracted to, again, this whole like aggressive alpha male thing, but not for long-term relationships. Like when you start looking at the data of whether or not these things actually become long-term relationships, the stability aspect of it, of not being too like all over the place, being trustworthy is actually a big thing. Because again, you're now in a situation where both sides are choosing each other for this long-term partnership question. And generally, usually for the purpose of raising little ones.
Yeah, sure and stability is huge.
Stability is huge. Mm-hmm. And then kind of the last thing for men is there's this idea of pre-selection, where if you're a guy and you're already surrounded by attractive women, not necessarily because you're dating them, just even because you're a friend to them and they like you and they enjoy you, that in itself already is one of the biggest signals of all these things. The fact that you're a good guy, you know, you got things taken care of, is just, if you don't have any female friends around you to basically vouch for you, maybe work on getting some.
Interesting.
Because that in itself is a very big thing, where a lot of times in the modern digital world, we are getting to a point where people are very, very lonely and very, very separated. And to the point where even, I think it's exaggerated, but there's all these ideas of like toxic masculinity where, you know, people, they're saying they wouldn't let single men go see the Joker movie when it came out. Did you remember this whole thing? There's some movie theaters because they thought, you know, these single men would get these extreme ideas about revolution and burning things down. The Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh yeah. I remember there's a whole incel connection. They were
afraid
you know, of the incel
because they thought it was going to inspire things.
Yeah.
So having women around you, not that you're necessarily dating, is actually a really big factor in terms of then being selected by a mate.
Interesting.
You know, and it also means generally, even when you're in a relationship, continuing to be somebody who is attractive to others is one of the biggest things you can do. Because a lot of times, once you get into a relationship, people forget to do the things that got them to the relationship in the first place, and they start letting themselves go.
We get complacent. Too comfortable.
Again, this whole health thing, right? For example, a lot of people like kind of let themselves go, and you want to be there for your partner long term. So do some running, get in shape, eat right. This is a long-term investment. And one of the ways you can tell if you're doing a good job is that if other people outside of the relationship are interested in you. Not that you have to do anything about it.
Yeah.
But that means, like, you know, that's going to keep the fire alive in the relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That helps create the passion, actually, if you get to the passion section.
Right.
All right. For women, practical recommendations. Okay. I don't want to get too much into the physical aspect for women because women know probably way better than we do about, you know, like, so makeup obviously is a way of mimicking signs of fertility and youth, right? Like the blush it does this thing where it mimics like fertility and youth signals in women. But one thing I would mention for women, and it's also kind of important for men, is the idea that women try to get very, very, very lean. Right. There's an obsession with like losing weight, and you know, being of a good weight is an important aspect. But much like in men, where men try to get super, super muscular because they think that's the most attractive thing in the world, the irony is that in that game they are competing with other men, not because that's the most attractive thing women find.
Okay.
And with women, a lot of times when they're competing with other women on this whole leanness thing.
Oh, really?
So what ends up happening is that men find women that are not super lean more attractive than super, super lean women. And then women find men who are super, in good shape, but not like testosterone, like not a steroid user bodybuilder attractive, right? And so people get stuck in these loops of body dysmorphia.
Yeah. No, that makes sense because, like, if you're a male and you're bodybuilding, you're not necessarily doing it to impress women.
Yeah,
you're doing it to impress other dudes.
Yeah, you're
so you jack yourself up bigger than them.
It's a similar thing with like beards, right? One of the things that we can tie to beards is that beards is not something that's meant to be attractive to women. It's supposed to scare off other dudes. And so
funny.
So there's situations where when the male and female ratio in certain groups starts leaning towards having not enough women, that it shows that men start growing beards at a higher rate.
Just to scare off the other dudes.
Just because, like, you know, if you're a really scary big dude, chances are no one's going to try to go after your girl.
That's so funny.
So that's kind of an interesting thing.
All right.
And then for women and the kind of the weight thing, one of the funny things that kind of comes up is that they've done these studies where they tracked Playboy centerfold models, and depending on whether the economy is up or down, When the economy is up, they get leaner. But when the economy is going down, they get heavier.
Okay.
So the actual, what is considered attractive in society changes. Men find, I guess, women who are slightly heavier.
Because they have more resources?
During a time of economic downturn, which we potentially might be heading into now. So keep that in mind. But it's just very crazy that they were able to, it's a very consistent effect.
Interesting.
Where they were able to track Playboy centerfolds over decades.
Wow. Based off of recessions and...
Yes.
Wow.
So like in the 90s, it was, I guess things were going pretty good because we were in that was the height of heroin chic, you know, the Kate Moss look, right?
Yeah.
And as these kind of things go down, there's a shift in terms of what is considered attractive.
Interesting.
Right. But in terms of practical advice for women, testing for long-term commitment, not just charisma. We talked about this in the psychopath episode, but if a guy is really good on a first date, that can be a red flag.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of times the people who stay in long-term relationships and are good at being in long-term relationships are not getting a lot of first dates. Right? The guys who are very good at, you know, first dates can potentially be a little bit of a red flag. And even there's the head behavioral scientist at Hinge. She has this recommendation that you should try to always make it to the second date.
Okay.
Because if a guy is not very good on the first date, and if he's terrible, obviously you don't have to go on the second date. But if he was just okay, men get better with subsequent dates.
So give guys a chance, because the first date doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an indicator of long-term success.
Right, because again, especially if somebody is very good on the first date, a lot of times these are your player types. These guys are really good at this.
Yeah.
So it's, again, test for long-term commitment, not charisma. And so the fact that the behavioral scientist at Hinge, she's like, yeah, you guys should try to make it to the second date, because satisfaction rates seem to increase if you have more time to kind of get to know each other and grow, right?
Yeah. Got it.
Then leveraging kind of scarcity in terms of like not necessarily putting out right away. One of the things I found, like when I was doing a lot of dating, is that you don't want to be too impressive as a guy, because if you're too impressive as a guy, a girl might want to string you along because she wants to keep you around.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It helps being a little trashy.
Okay.
I mean, it's an observation I made, but generally, if you potentially, making a guy wait,
like friend zoning, or maybe
just making a guy wait. So
just wait longer.
Yes, it's not a one night stand.
Okay.
If you don't care about having the guy in a long term relationship and you think he's just hot, great, have the one night stand.
Got it.
But if you see there's potential in terms of a long term relationship, it's probably better not to go for the one night stand.
So that's
initially.
a good thing then, I guess, for women to kind of wait.
Well, think about it. Yeah, again, you can absolutely have one night stands, but it's might not select for the best kind of guy who's going to stick around.
Yeah,
and that's just more for fun rather than.
It just depends on what you want.
Yeah, so making that decision.
Yeah,
and then influencing by rewarding good faith effort, right, among guys. So like getting guys to do things for you, right, but not like getting guys to pay for things, but like if a guy comes over and like helps build your shelf and is putting time and energy and cleverness into things, and then thanking and rewarding that and giving appreciation for that, you're actually able to shape people's behavior over time through how you show appreciation.
Interesting. I think for us guys, we do appreciate women who do show appreciation.
Yeah.
I think that's what one of the things that guys really like is when a woman actually appreciates them.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a really big turn on for guys. I can totally see that.
It reminds me of that talk that Katy Perry had with Alex Cooper on the Call Her Daddy podcast.
What'd she say?
So apparently every time that Orlando Bloom does the dishes, she rewards him with a BJ. And it was I guess it was the most like,
man,
it was like the most like scandalous moment of that talk. But she's like, I love when he cleans. So she's putting that strategy in play correctly.
Where do you find a woman like that? As a guy, that's a question I want to ask. But that works.
Yeah. So as the guy in the relationship, then you're putting in the work to try to do your best, right?
Yeah.
And again, you have to be careful about. There are guys who, for example, are very rich and they're just throwing money at a situation. There's a difference between putting your time and resources of like your cleverness and your talent into a situation, or a guy who's just throwing money in a situation, because that could be actually a red flag. But if if a guy's putting in effort into it, learning to try to create those situations, because with every effort he puts in, he's getting a little bit more committed to the relationship, and making sure to appreciate when the guy is putting in that effort. Right.
Yeah.
And so to kind of finalize it is that if you think about love as a strategic partnership, probably one of the best things to do for young couples is try to find some sort of situations where you guys are overcoming challenges together.
Okay.
Like I personally, throughout my 20s, I never wanted to be in a relationship. I was kind of bouncing around. I was, I don't know. I've
like long-term relationships.
Yeah, I never had basically up until I got married, I never really had any long-term relationships.
Wow. Interesting.
I don't know. I just I knew I wanted to be a little crazy and a little bit wild. And
so what made you change your mind?
Well, one, it was kind of interesting is I started to gain weight.
Okay.
Do you remember I telling you this story?
Vaguely.
Yeah. So around like 28, 29, I started noticing that I started gaining weight out of nowhere.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then also around the same time, it's like when my mindset completely changed. And this is how powerful hormones are. Is that for most guys around 28, 29, 30 is when that huge testosterone spike that starts when you're like 15 years old starts to subside. And your perception of what you want and what you're trying to do completely changes. And all of a sudden I'm like, I want to settle down, right?
Yeah.
But what really kind of connected me and my wife is that she was in film school and she asked me to help out on her films, and we started working on films together. And if anyone's ever been on set, it's a complicated puzzle. There's all these things going on. It's chaos. It's time. I've heard a lot of guys, they do these situations where they on purpose try, if they're in a new relationship, try to put themselves into some sort, go on a crazy vacation somewhere that is uncomfortable and a little crazy and wild.
Yeah.
Again, because those little tests, those little challenges of how you guys do well in those situations, one, makes you grow closer, but you also see how you're going to be dealing with, complicated, environments and puzzles. So if you're meeting somebody through like, I don't know, your CrossFit club or something, or these kind of environments, that might be one of the best places to actually meet people and be able to, over a period of time, to see how they are navigating challenges.
Yeah, because
and to grow together.
That's absolutely correct. Because again, like one thing you guys can do is go on vacation, and when you start traveling and going to the airport and trying to navigate a different foreign country or place, it's like you learn a lot about the other person.
Yeah.
When they're under stress, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess that does make a lot of sense to go through these hardships to learn about your partner.
You don't get because you don't get that on just like dates, unless you're going to like escape rooms or something, which might be a cool like
that's
date,
a good
right?
idea.
You go on challenges.
Wow, that's a great date idea. Maybe not the first date.
Maybe not the first date, but you go and you try to do things that are hard, that are difficult, and you're trying to solve problems together. And that way you can sort of, again, let both sides be able to demonstrate their talents.
True.
Right. And then that way, by the time you guys get to situations where life is throwing inevitable challenges at you, right? Because life is going to throw challenges at people. You now have seen how you two work together as a partnership.
Yeah.
In that sense. And so the first ingredient of love, as seen through the point of view of evolutionary game theory, is commitment.
Commitment. That's so important. But it's also very valid. Well, I mean, thank you, Gene, for this amazing conversation. For part one of kind of breaking down the biological, psychological, evolutionary game theory of love.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we learned a lot. I think we learned some practical advice. But again, the thing that I got out of it the most is the triangle, right? Where you need the friendship, you need the passion, but you also need the kind of the coordination, the commitment to be together. And those three aspects are so important to relationships. And I think just being self-aware of those three aspects and making sure you're hitting all 3 points is going to be probably one of the biggest factors of having a successful relationship, I feel like. So thank you for that information, Gene.
Of course.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us on Manipulation Game Psychology and Marketing Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed part one. I'm looking forward to part 2 and 3. And until next time, follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you want to listen or watch our podcast. Until next time, I'm Darren with our marketing expert, Gene. Bye.
Bye, guys.